Now after having battled Blue and Giovanni, I went to take on Sabrina. Her gym is another one that's frustrating, as you need to use teleporters in order to reach the room she's in, and each of the other rooms are trainers, save for the room you enter. I don't know how anyone else goes about it, but I always go to the teleporter on the left side of the room, and if I spawn on that side, I just go to the right panel across from it. The trainers in this gym range from psychics and channelers, and Pidgeot took on the majority of battles, but I also swapped him out for other Pokemon like Venus and Howlet. Now, yes, Psychic type is strong against Venus, since it's part poison, but some of the trainers use Slowpoke and Slowbro, and since they're part water, I just use Venus to take them out with no trouble whatsoever. And since Channelers were also a part of the trainer lineup, I sent Howlet out to handle their Haunters. So now, it was time for Sabrina. Now she's a rather difficult trainer. Psychic types have 3 weaknesses: Ghost, Dark, and Bug types. Now, Ghost and Dark type I understand, but Bug types? Anyways, while you could use a Ghost type, i.e. the only Ghost type you can get, it comes with the downside that it is also part poison, which is weak to Psychic as I mentioned. So you'll likely need to rely on a Pokemon that knows a Dark type move, like Howlet. Anyways, in the battle, Pidgeot was actually able to take out her Kadabra with ease, only 1 wing attack. Her Mr. Mime was next, but this time it took 2 wing attacks to take it down. Next, she sent out Venomoth, and I brought out Howlet. He got confused, but still finished it off with a Flame Wheel. Next up was her Alakazam. Bite was still effective, even after her use of Calm Mind. But Howlet went down after pulling off a couple of Bite attacks. So to finish this off, I sent out Pidgeot, who took down her Alakazam with a wing attack, thus earning me the Marsh Badge. Now before I headed out onto Cinnabar Island, I took a little detour. This is a series where I detail you on how I completed the Pokedex, and this place was going to have to be visited, which it's actually a place you have to go to get Surf. Looking at this in hindsight, anyways, it's in Fuchsia City, more specifically, the Safari Zone. Now, there is nothing I hate more than a Pokemon who runs away. The Pokemon in particular are Chansey, Tauros, Scyther, Kangaskhan, and Pinsir. They run all the time. Throw a rock, they run. Throw some bait, they run. Throw a ball, they run. The only other thing that makes this more frustrating is their spawn chances. Those Pokemon that I mentioned, their spawn chances range from a 1% to a 4%. So you are likely going to end up spending so much money to enter the Safari Zone and try your luck at finding them. Thankfully, there was a workaround, something I did to get the most out of the Safari Zone without spending so much money. If you are in a grassy area that holds one of these difficult Pokemon, do not move. Do not take a single step. Simply turn left or right and stay in one place. If you do that and just turn your character, the game will act as if you just walked onto that patch of grass. So without wasting any steps, you can continuously try your hand at catching them. So the only thing you have to worry about is running out of Safari Balls. Or you run out of Sanity. I spent hours upon hours trying to find the Pokemon I needed in order to catch the Pokemon I needed to complete the Dex. And there's still the possibility of catching one. What made this so much worse for me was that I was thinking in Gen 1 strategies, where throwing a rock will increase your chance to catch, but it increases their chance to run away. And throwing a bait will decrease your chance to catch, but it will decrease their chance to run. If you'd like a deeper look into the Safari Zone, Lyra made a website goes into detail about the Safari Zone across the generations and offers some strategies to catch some Pokemon in the Safari Zone. Now, some of you may suggest that I simply look elsewhere for these Pokemon, but they only spawn here. Originally, Chansey can also be spotted in the Cerulean Cave, but its appearance was removed in Generation 3. The only Pokemon you can get outside of the Safari Zone are Dratini and Scyther. Also, just as a quick little reminder, this is for Pokemon in Pokemon Fire Red. In Leaf Green, you can get a Pinsir instead of a Scyther. So, the only places to go and catch these Pokemon are here in the Safari Zone in order to complete the Pokedex. I spent a good few hours trying to find them, going to an area where they have a 4% chance to appear and praying that I'm lucky enough to find them. And imagine my surprise when I learned that feeding Chansey bait increases its chance to catch. Granted, it may not be enough, but it's still a better chance than having it run away. But other than those Pokemon, this is an area where you can find some new Pokemon, as well as catching some old ones. But other than those Pokemon, this is an area where you can find some new Pokemon, as well as catch some other ones. What I mean is, if you want to catch your own female Nidoran, you can actually find them in abundance here at the Safari Zone. Even their evolved form is here, so if you have a Moonstone, you can catch a Nidorina and get a Nidoqueen right off the bat. You can also find Venomoths, Rhyhorns, and Executes. Then there's the waters in the Safari Zone, where you can try and catch some Pokemon like Poliwags, Psyducks, and Dratinis. And if you're lucky, you can even land a Dragonair. So if you're following along with this journey, then you'd know that the only new Pokemon here in this area are, as I stated, Chansey, Scyther, Kangaskhan, Tauros, as well as other more common Pokemon like Execute and Rhyhorn. If you were to fish with a good rod, which I hadn't got yet, you can catch a Goldeen and Poliwag, and if you were to fish with a super rod, you'd be able to get the Goldeen and its evolved from Seaking, Dratini, the previously mentioned Dragonair, and Psyduck. But after spending so much time, and I mean a lot of time, I managed to get my hands on the difficult to catch Pokemon. Chansey was tough because of how I went about trying to catch it, and the same goes for Tauros as well, but when it came to Kangaskhan, I actually had an easier time catching it than the others. Just some bait and it sat there while I tried to catch her. The only other Pokemon I needed to catch was Psyduck. While it is a 15% chance to spawn, once he made an appearance I managed to get my hands on him. After clearing the Safari Zone and both getting the HM Surf and the Pokemon needed for the Dex, I headed towards the house next to the Wardens to speak to another fishing guru. There he gave me the Good Rod, which is a step above the Old Rod and allows us to fish for Pokemon we still need in order to complete the Pokedex. I had an Oddish in my team because it knows Sweet Scent and is a surefire way to have Pokemon appear without wasting any steps. I had wanted to try and make sure that I do come across the rare Pokemon, but their levels are low in the pool of other Pokemon, so I couldn't force their spawn. I'll go into more detail what I mean when we get back to the power plant. Anyways, I put Dragonair back in my team and headed out towards Route 15 in order to try and catch a Pokemon I hadn't fished up. After a couple of failed attempts, I instead decided to return to the Safari Zone and see if I can find them there. After a while, I managed to fish up a Poliwag. Stocking up on some items, I went to the box to change up my party again. I swapped Nidoking out with Lapras, as I wanted her to be the Pokemon for Surf. While Nidoking can learn Surf, I didn't know he could learn Surf at the time. I kind of like Lapras' Pokedex entry, where it ferries people on its back, so that's mainly why I kept Lapras on my team. Anyways, before I head out to Cinnabar Island, I made a quick trip back to Pewter, as there was an item I hadn't picked up yet. When you learn the move Cut, and you run back to Pewter City, there is an entrance at the museum behind a tree. When you cut the tree and enter, you'll find a scientist that has an old amber. If you've watched the movie Jurassic Park, it's essentially the mosquito that has Pokemon DNA in it. We're asked to take this to a Pokemon lab, which there is only one lab you can take this to, and it's on Cinnabar Island. But before I headed out, I made a little stop over by the patch of grass just south of Pallet Town. It's a patch you can't reach unless you know the move Surf. The Pokemon in this area is a Tangela, a Pokemon you've likely seen when you were battling Erica in Celadon City. Catching the Pokemon, I continued south of Pallet Town towards Cinnabar. Along the way, I battled some trainers, trying to get Lapras caught up with the rest, as well as also getting Dragonair leveled up. Fishermen and swimmers are along this route, so it's primarily water type. Using a grass type or an electric type will help you sweep through them easily. This route is the shortest to Cinnabar, with the only other one being from Fuchsia. If you were to go through that route, you'd have passed through the Seafoam Islands, which we'll get to later. After dealing with the trainers, I finally reached Cinnabar Island. It's one of the smallest places in Kanto in regards to a place with a gym. It's not smaller than Pallet Town, as Cinnabar Island has 2 more buildings than it. There is the obvious Pokemon Gym, where you can challenge Blaine to get the Volcano Badge. Pokemon Mansion, where you can find Pokemon like Growlithe, Coughings, and Weezings. The standard Pokemon Center and Pokemon Mart. And finally the Pokemon Lab, where you can revive fossils. We'll need to get into Pokemon Mansion in order to find an item for the gym, but for now, let's head to the Pokemon Lab to revive some fossils and do some trades. Starting with the fossils, I met with the scientist and gave him both the Helix fossil and the Old Amber, giving me the Pokemon Ammonite and Aerodactyl. Next up were trades. There's one that will give you a Ponyta for his Seal, but we can find Seal in its evolved form in the Seafoam Islands, so I passed on that. Another trade I did was Raichu for Electrode, finishing off the Voltorb line without having to risk an Electrode using self-destruct. Now in regards to the fossil Pokemon we received, depending on the fossil you chose in Mount Moon depends on the Pokemon you get. A Dome fossil gets you a Kabuto, and a Helix fossil will get you an Ammonite. The main struggle for this series is having Ammonite, as well as Kabuto, up to level 40. And they start at level 5! Anyways, I have a plan for that. So, continuing on my way through the Pokemon Mansion, I caught the Coughing line and a Grimer. Grimer is one that will have to be leveled up, since in Fire Red, Muck doesn't appear at all. I also battled the trainers inside the mansion, giving Lapras the experience share and battling with Dratini to continue getting it to evolve. The Pokemon Mansion is a required place to go, because in the basement of the building is a secret key, which is used to unlock the door on Cinnabar Island. There are statues in the dungeon that open and close certain doors, and you can see their indication in the eyes. So, did you know that Porygon is the first artificially created Pokemon? It's even stated in Pokedex entry in Fire Red. Using the most advanced technologies, scientists finally succeeded in making the first artificial Pokemon. Another interesting thing about Porygon, other than the fact that it can turn into data and enter cyberspace, is that it's copy protected, so it can't be duplicated. However, there are dozens of Porygon in the game corner. Anyways, my point is, Porygon wasn't the only artificial Pokemon. Scattered throughout the mansions are books. They're entries involving a group of scientists. They mention how they have found a new Pokemon deep in the jungle and have christened this new Pokemon Mew. And just finding a new Pokemon isn't enough. These scientists decide to create another Pokemon, a Pokemon they named Mewtwo. But in their final diary entry found in the basement, they mention how they were unable to curb Mewtwo's vicious tendencies. It's an interesting bit of lore involving the Pokemon, especially back during the time when the games made references to the real world, like how Arcanine is considered a legend in Chinese mythology, or how they discovered Mew deep in South America. After all, the Kanto region is a real place, as it's a region in Japan. Anyways, before we go and challenge the Cinnabar Island gym, I decided to run back to the daycare man. Horsey had grown to level 26, bringing it closer to when it would evolve. But before we get to that, I left Ammonite with the daycare man. For the rest of the main story, Ammonite will be in his care to level up as much as possible before the post-game grinding. After dropping them off, I take the route south of Fuchsia to challenge the other trainers along the way and get any more experience from my Pokemon, primarily Lapras, as she's our MVP against Blaine. And at this point our Pokemon should be up close to level 40 for this gym. The next location we come to is the Seafoam Islands. This is a very cool place. Where you'll find water types here. Pokemon like Psyduck, Seal, and their respective evolutions. Even some fan-favorite Pokemon return in this dungeon, like Zubat, and Zubat. Oh, and their older sibling Golbat. Now, while I may be flying back to Cinnabar Island, allow me to take this moment to explain the dungeon. Seafoam Island focuses on a certain kind of puzzle if you wish to have a chance to take on a certain kind of Pokemon. You need to have a Pokemon that uses Strength, an HM you get when you return the Gold Teeth to the Warden in Fuchsia City. There are boulders that litter along the floors, and you have to push these boulders into each of the holes in the floor. Below, there are strong river currents that will push you to a certain location. unless you plug up the flow with the boulders that'll allow you free movement. When you have figured out the puzzle, you'll have the chance to catch Articuno. Articuno is another one of the legendary bird trio in the Kanto region, an ice flying type. Being that we currently have access to a Pokemart that sells Ultra Balls, we could go ahead and take on the bird and attempt to catch it, but I'm not going to. The legendary trio, along with one other Pokemon previously mentioned, are in a fixed location and are basically guaranteed to be there. So with that, I figured that I would leave those 3 legendary bird Pokemon for last. One final challenge in order to finish up the Pokedex.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like below and consider subscribing to the channel to see some more content like this. I'm sorry that this video in particular is taking quite a long time for me to edit and upload. It's primarily because I lost interest in editing these videos. Once I got everything separated out in Premiere Pro, where it's like, okay, I can spend one day working on this one, I just procrastinated and set it off to the side. But I'm going to try and get back into the swing of editing these videos and get them out of there. And, you know, like, have some content for all of you to enjoy. Also, it's going to be very weird to hear to watch these videos. Especially with how I recorded my voice back then when I did this project. It's... Whew. It's not as loud it's not as loud as whenever I did the Echoes of Wisdom commentary over it. But yeah, so I'm gonna try and get those videos edited, and published as soon as possible just to finish this project off. So yeah, thank you guys again, and I will see you, thank you guys again, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye!